It's nice to think about. I also recommend that when someone is in conflict with one other particular individual person, whether a family member, a coworker, it can be a neighbor, it can be a business partner, all manner of things. A commitment to try to deal with it can be very helpful. Now, if I say to you, I know how to solve our problems, I'll just tell you, if you're not hopelessly irritated with me, then you probably didn't hear me. But I'd like to think that if I said to you, I feel so awful about the way things are going, and I imagine that you do too, can we try to figure out what to do? And that would be the commitment to work on it. And then there would be lots of reasons to go forward, and you can figure out, well, when are we going to find a time to talk privately, which can be very helpful instead of ears, whether family members or anyone else who just happens to overhear. Find a place to do this without a lot of supervision, unwanted. But when people are committed to trying to make it better, it can help a great deal.
That was my next question. Are there ways for people in conflict to resolve it on their own? So it sounds like the very first issue would be commitment.
I think so.
To commit to that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And is there a certain place where you should have a conversation about
Private
managing this?
Is fabulous. It really is nice to, and the other thing that's quite interesting, especially as we're so very technologically connected, when I'm in a mediation session where people have come to me and we're sitting hopefully at a nice round table so we don't have people looking at each other at sides, but sometimes we do. The very first thing is, can we please turn off the cell phones? Can we be focused on what we're doing here? For that matter, there are people who will, in a workplace situation or even in a home, the computer screen's in front of them the whole time, and they cannot focus on the conversation they should be having. Now, also something very useful, let me just as an aside, elder care is so much better than it used to be, and there's so much more information about various types of physical challenges, emotional challenges, cognitive challenges. One thing that the people who are the real pros will say to us is, who are interested in elder mediation, is challenging conversations with someone who's experiencing the beginning of dementia should happen when they're at their very best. Well, isn't that true of all of us?
Right.
That tends not to be around sundown. That tends to be a challenging time of day.
Right.
So if you're going to be having a tough conversation with an older person, certainly a loved one, try to do it where that person is physically comfortable, emotionally comfortable. If their peak is 11 o'clock in the morning, try to do it then.
Good point.
Try to do it in their home if you can. And if they're exhausted, well, then there's time to take a break.
Right.
It's not somehow we're going to wait each other out until we force some sort of an agreement that this is going to solve everything.
Right. So there's, from what I can see, 3 different ways to resolve conflicts. One is people can do it on their own. They can seek out informal help, as we discussed before the show, a friend, a family member, a pastor, and then there's mediation. Who would be a good choice for informal assistance?
For informal assistance, I think in terms of someone you trust and someone the person you're in conflict trusts. Wonderful is someone that you both know, or maybe someone neither of you knows. And you both have a sort of casual acquaintance relationship. It's one thing that's terribly important for a mediator, whether a paid mediator or someone who's just trying to help out, is a sense of neutrality.
Right.
Because if I walk into a situation and I see, and sometimes this happens in the elder care issues, if it's a family in conflict and there may be multiple siblings, one sibling has been the point person for getting a geriatric care manager involved, or the home care aides agency involved, there can be a sense that because that sibling has had a relationship in the past and continues to have one with that person isn't neutral. That person likes that person and will never hear my perspective or my point of view about why we're struggling. So the neutrality part can be extremely important.
How can you get the help of a trained mediator?
One thing that is challenging is, unlike lots of other professions, mediation is not one where there is a licensing requirement in Connecticut or much of anywhere, or a certification. You can't go to the state and say, tell me who all the private mediators are who are licensed to do this. It doesn't work that way. The internet can be very helpful. I don't do divorcing couples work. There are resources that you can find fairly easily online with that. You can find folks who do my kind of work through various search engines on Google. Also, people who are involved, certainly in the elder care world, are becoming more and more aware of elder mediation. And so the visiting nurse folks, the folks at various kinds of facilities where folks live, people who have seen how hard this is on families to be in this kind of conflict. And it does not do mom or dad any good either.
Right.
Yeah.
How does mediation work start to finish?
The hardest part often is getting everyone in agreement to try. Can we try to resolve this? Well, it's not going to work. Well, it's her fault. Well, all of these reasons sometimes. So that can be the biggest challenge of all, is that commitment to try to do something to improve the situation. One thing that's essential is the neutrality of the mediator. Another thing is it's completely voluntary. I as a mediator can never force anyone to do anything,
Right.
whether to participate, to continue, or to agree to anything at all. So sometimes people will be frustrated, and they will tell me that. I'm terribly frustrated with this. This is a waste of my time. And sometimes we have that conversation in a group setting where everyone's together. We may also have private sessions where I talk to one or two people at a time. Some situations, I give folks an opportunity to talk to me by phone in advance of meeting as a group. And they will sometimes point out to me things that no one's going to say this out loud, but this is the elephant in the room, and you should know this. And of course, what's interesting is one will tell me that with a suggestion no one else is going to tell you this. Well, probably they all are going to tell me that privately, that this is the real issue. It might be financial, it might be there's been a tremendous change. Sometimes an issue is an in-law, that there is a mother and now there is a new in-law who, a daughter-in-law, son-in-law, the dynamics of the family have changed. Not necessarily for better, not necessarily for worse, but change in itself can be hard. But to finish your question, my answer to your question, mediation, we work together to try to find a solution that works for that particular family or whatever the situation may be. I can't impose it on them. It doesn't have to be terribly time-consuming. Sometimes we meet for an afternoon, and what really needs to happen is some work on a communications plan. Sometimes it's as simple as we will talk every month instead of waiting until something awful has happened.
So it's preventive care.
Yes,
Oh my
exactly.
goodness. What a concept.
It's great. It's great stuff. And I do see people who are in such strain, and you see it physically. I'm not a physician. I'm not trained in medicine in any way, but the physical manifestations, they are in such pain over this emotional
Right,
pain.
right.
And to see it leave is the real joy, is to see them
I completely understand, and it seems to me that your law background gives you such an edge to be able to really manage this and do a lot of good for people. The one thing that I just kept thinking also with mediation, even in regard to healthcare, is that very often people will wait until they're in a crisis before they come in and they get any kind of a care, and by that time it's very expensive. It's way too late. So you have a preventive plan also, and a way to be proactive with conflict to manage it. Now, how does mediation differ from arbitration?
That's so important, because sometimes people will say to me, oh, no, I don't want to do that. And someone will say to me casually, oh, it must be really fun to tell people what to do. I say, no, I actually don't do that. I do a tiny bit of commercial arbitration, and that's two companies fighting with each other. An arbitrator is essentially a private judge. You hire someone to decide, and they will decide. Win, lose, 60, 40, but you make your best case to an arbitrator, and the arbitrator decides, and under the law, it's very difficult to have that decision overturned. And that's by design. Essentially, the courts have said, we will decide your conflict if you bring it to us. But you don't get to say, we're going to take it over here to arbitration. Oh, whoops, I didn't like the result. I want to come back here and have you take another look at it.
Oh.
So it's very difficult. It's very limited opportunities for review. But it's very important for me, because some people will say, oh, I don't want to do mediation because I don't want to be forced in anything. And I need to clarify. And even lawyers who don't do this kind of work don't always remember the distinction. So it's very important. As a mediator, I can't make anyone do anything. My job is to help you find what works for you.
You know, that is such a great point. It's just like with our cars. We don't not change the oil, not align the front end, not do a tune-up and wait till it breaks down to bring it into the shop. It's regularly scheduled maintenance. So with conflict, it's the same thing. You're managing this as you go to prevent the big costly lawsuit or the arbitration where somebody else decides and you're stuck with whatever decision that apparently impartial person made.
And not so much creativity when someone else tells you how it's going to be. And sometimes there are cases that have been in litigation for years and years and they end in mediation right before a trial. But it's partly because people finally have said, I'm not sure I want to roll the dice. I'm convinced I'm right. That doesn't mean that everyone else is going to see it my way, whether a judge or a jury.
Right.
But I think the other thing that's really can be very frustrating sometimes is there are limits to what the law can do. It is win-lose as a rule.
You know, we have time for one more question. What are some ways that mediation is used that are not well known?
People know about divorcing couples, and it's a fabulous thing. And because so many people do that kind of work, I've kind of focused on other sorts of things where it can happen. Community mediation projects are fabulous. Those are volunteers usually who work for social service agencies with issues in the courts sometimes, neighbors. There are also elder mediation, which is getting more and more prominence, has to do with helping with tough conversations with and about aging loved ones. Workplace issues can be helpful. Public policy sometimes can be important. Some of the work I do with families, sometimes it's called family wealth mediation, which is, as it sounds, but it doesn't take that much money for folks to start arguing about things like that. There are just more and more creative ways to think about it. There's almost nothing in human interaction that can't use mediation. We just don't think of it. That's why it's used as little as it is it just doesn't occur to us that that's a possibility. But I look forward to that changing faster and faster.
Well, it sounds like you provide a wonderful service, and you've concentrated on areas that have been very underserved. So congratulations on that. Looks like we might have time for one more question. Is there any reason why mediation just isn't used more often? Is it more just of a not knowing that it's available?
Exactly. It's that, and I think sometimes the confusion with arbitration, because that sounds scary, that someone else is going to make me decide, and frankly, a little bit of maybe a lack of understanding of conflict being normal and to some extent unavoidable. So there is that shame factor. There are people who will call me for help, but they're first, I'm so embarrassed. And I say, you folks get a gold star because you're trying to deal with it.
Okay. All right. Well, please give the viewing audience your contact information.
Oh, sure. Well, my name is Jane Beddall, and my company is Dovetail Resolutions LLC. And you can find us on the web at www.dovetailresolutions.com or by phone 203-887-1160. And I'm happy to work with folks all over Connecticut and occasionally out of state.